Hi friends, and welcome back to a new episode of Let's Talk Elvis.
I'd like to talk to you a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of the things that happened from my side of the story. There's been a lot written and a lot said about what happened to me, but never from my side.
You guys, I'm so excited to finally be making another Let's Talk Elvis video. I haven't done one of these in such a long time. Life has just been so crazy busy with school and family and plays and everything, but I really do miss having these conversations, and I'm so happy to be back. Today, we've got a really interesting video, I think. I'm going to be talking about censorship within like the Elvis community and just surrounding Elvis's life in general. The information that is being shared and the information that is not, and the problems with that. So think of some of the Elvis stories that you know, some that have been told a million times. Which stories pop into your head first? Maybe it's the story of him shooting the TV. Maybe it's a story where he's dating a specific girl and a scenario with that. Or maybe it's a story with drugs. Maybe it's a story about his temper. And maybe you don't think of any of those things. Maybe for you, it's something different. Maybe it's a story of his generosity or his love for God, or a story of him going out of his way for a fan. Maybe stories like that first come into your mind when you think of Elvis. And in that case, congrats, because you're one of the few. I did an episode a while back in 2020 about a girl named Karen. Karen was a little girl who lived with cerebral palsy, and Elvis was her hero. Her nurse, Lena, helped Karen write letters to Elvis during her time that she spent with Karen. Lena had come across the name of a Hollywood correspondent with close links to Elvis and contacted her with Karen's story. When the correspondence started, Elvis gave Karen a special address to write to, an address that bypassed his secretaries and came directly to him. Over time, Karen confided in Elvis, and the two of them vowed to become friends. Elvis sent her all these encouraging letters with statements that motivated her to keep her chin up despite what was going on in her life, that she was beautiful the way that she was, and that she had so much potential within her. And along with many, many letters, Elvis sent her various gifts as well. Lena Canada's book, To Elvis with Love, is a story of the power of Elvis and how his spirit impacted and uplifted a young life so deeply. It details the joy and happiness Elvis Presley could bring to people, something that he excelled at. Elvis took the time out of his majorly busy schedule and stressful life to connect with a young girl who held him at the highest place of honor in her heart. Yet this is one of the rarest stories in Elvis history. This book is out of print along with many others that cost us hundreds of dollars to read about stories like this. Not the same tired stories of his addictions, temper, and weight issues. All of the stories about Elvis are important, do not get me wrong, but that's just the problem. All of them are important to understand Elvis Presley. Yet these kinds of stories are getting more and more rare, and more people are only hearing about the negative things rather than the true Elvis Presley at his truest, deepest root. People would rather hear these over-exaggerated, hard-to-believe, over-sensationalized stories that strip away at Elvis's humanity and make him seem to be this spectacle, like a spectacle, and someone whose life was so much different than ours could or should ever be. Books like Lena Canada's are becoming increasingly more rare, less talked about, and harder to find, while stories like Elvis What Happened or Elvis by Albert Goldman and other books that drag his character are not nearly as scarce. Did you know that the movie Touched by Love is based off of Lena Canada's book, and it is free and available to watch on YouTube? Maybe you did, but again, you are one of the few. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't stories that are shared like this one, because there are. We all know of Denise, the little girl who had cancer that Elvis spent some time with before a show. Her mother recalled this: "All I can say is Elvis was more than I had expected, and I knew he would be marvelous. He was so warm and friendly with Denise, with all of us. It was just beautiful. When Denise came into the trailer, he smiled at her. A real smile, not the take a picture kind. And he said, 'Hello, sweetheart,' just as warm and friendly as if he'd known her all his life. Her little face lit up like I don't know what. He gave her a careful hug. Obviously, they told him of her condition, and he kissed her on the cheek. And from there on, she was floating. She was so excited she could hardly talk, but she managed better than I probably would have under the circumstances. She had a huge poster of him that they gave us at the Hilton, and she asked him to autograph it. He carefully inscribed, "To Denise, love you, Elvis Presley." Needless to say, that poster has a place of honor in our den. She asked how Priscilla and Lisa were, and he said fine, and made little chit-chat with her in this wonderfully warm, easy manner. We weren't in there very long, but every second was a thrill for us. Elvis turned to me, shook hands, and let me introduce myself. He seemed very interested in me, which was truly more than I had anticipated. You know big stars like that. You don't expect them to have such a personal touch. He was just fantastic. I only got a handshake, darn it, but my baby got a hug and a kiss too, so that was an added thrill. Before she left him, she asked Elvis if he could sing a song for her. She wanted Love Me Tender or Don't Cry Daddy, which are two of her favorites. He said, "Okay, I'm going to sing one for you, but it's going to be a surprise." It surely was. When he got to that number, he announced from the stage, "The next song is for Denise, a very special girl I've just met backstage." And then he sang, "You Gave Me a Mountain," and we all cried. It was a sad song, but so fitting. The meeting was to give her one last happy memory at that show that night, and Elvis sang "Love Me Tender" at her request, and then dedicated "You Gave Me a Mountain" to her. So the photographers and the MGM on-tour cameras were all there to capture a deeply special moment, which that's why we have that footage that we know of today. It's from those cameras. But the film is available unofficially, and it was never even used in the movie, which just blows my mind. Like, why wouldn't you use such special film like that in a documentary? Like, that was Elvis Presley. This story is talked a lot about, which is great, but there are literally millions more like it that get shoved away and hid under the rug in order to share more sensationalized stories that make Elvis seem like a supernatural being or some kind of weird monster freak. I want to give some examples for the sake of this video. So here are some stories of this side of Elvis that I think don't get the spotlight that they should. In June Wanico's book, she details a story of a little girl named Carol Manuel who was dying of leukemia. I want to read you the story out of June's book, as I want to do it justice by telling it the way June remembered it. A friend of my family had an 8-year-old daughter suffering from leukemia. Little Carol, now seriously ill, was a big Elvis fan. She had seen all of his television appearances and had all of his records. They passed my house one day when Elvis was out signing autographs in the yard, but Carol was too weak to get out of the car. I had mentioned this to Elvis a few weeks ago, but in all the excitement, we had both forgotten about it. I had promised to call Mrs. Manuel the next time Elvis was in town. She had heard about Elvis being at the shoe store, but by the time she and Carol got there, Elvis had already gone. Elvis said he was going to stay at my house for a few hours, so I took it upon myself to invite them over. They were going to be at my house within the next 30 minutes. Now all he had to do was tell Elvis we were expecting company. I told him who was on the phone. Before I had a chance to tell him anything else, he said, "Go call her back, June. Tell her I'll be here for a while." "You're not too tired?" I asked. "No, I'm not too tired. Go call." "I don't have to call. I already invited them," I confessed, smiling. "I should have known," he said, smiling back. Elvis greeted them at the door when they arrived, and I made the introductions. Carol's eyes were as big as saucers. She was speechless. Elvis took her tiny hand and sat next to her on the couch. To break the silence, Mrs. Manuel and I were talking about how cute the hound dog was on the Steve Allen show. Carol said she liked the part where Elvis had to turn the dog to face him because it wasn't paying attention. Carol quickly got over her nervousness and was talking up a storm. She liked Hound Dog the best, and her next best was I Want You, I Need You, I Love You. Elvis picked her up, put her in his lap, and started singing her second favorite song. She would look in his face and then down at her little hands folded in her lap. He put his hand under her chin and lifted her face up. She would look at him a few seconds and then back at her folded hands. He lifted her face one more time and she smiled, unable to take her eyes from his face. "That's better. For a minute I thought you were going to be just like that hound dog," Elvis said, giving her a hug. I felt a lump in my throat when Mrs. Manuel, her eyes filling with tears, whispered "thank you" to Elvis. He gave her a nod, letting her know that somehow he realized a little of her pain. "Well, it was very nice meeting you, Elvis. I do hope we get to see you again," Mrs. Manuel said, clearing her throat. "Do we have to go, Mama?" Carol whispered. "Yes, we have to go. Elvis is very busy, and if we don't get home soon, Daddy will be worried about us." Elvis carried the little girl out to the car and kissed her on the forehead. "I'll see you when I come to Biloxi again, I promise." That wasn't the only time Elvis spent time with Carol. He also saw her again right before the time that she died. Later, as we were driving past Biloxi Hospital, I suddenly remembered Mrs. Manuel calling the house and leaving a message to say that Carol had been admitted. We were always so busy being busy. It's a wonder I remembered anything. I told Elvis about her call. "Is there any way we could sneak in for a few minutes just to say hello?" Elvis asked. "It's late and visiting hours are over, but we can try." We parked by the emergency room entrance and I went in to find out where she was. All the doors were open in the pediatric wing. I found Carol's room and ran back to the car to get Elvis. He opened the trunk of his car, took out an album, and we tiptoed down the hall. We made it into the room without seeing anyone. Carol was having a blood transfusion and appeared to be sleeping through it all. Her arm was strapped tightly to a board, partially cutting off the circulation in her tiny hand. She blinked when Elvis gently touched her little swollen fingers, but quickly opened them real wide when she realized who it was. "I knew you would come," she said in her weak little voice. Her eyes were glued to Elvis's face. She didn't even know I was in the room. "I told you I'd see you again," Elvis said, bending down and kissing her on the cheek. She smiled up at him, closed her eyes, and then fell sound asleep. Elvis put the album in the drawer on her night table, bent down again, kissed her goodnight, and we tiptoed out of the room. "Look around and count your blessings, June," he whispered. We walked around quietly through the halls of the hospital. We drove down to the beach in silence. There's also a small story of a little 10-year-old girl who got her scarf snatched from her at one of Elvis's shows. Elvis had a guard escort the little girl up to the stage, wiped her tears, kissed her on the cheek, and took a diamond cross necklace from his neck and placed it around hers. He then told her, "This is yours, honey, and nobody's going to take it away from you." In the article detailing this story, it is quoted, "The incident was not reported in the press at the time because people would rather read other things about the king of rock and roll in America, about problems with his ex-wife, about his weight, and about the wild parties and the girls who reportedly attended them. But that brief real-life drama with the little girl is more symbolic of the man Elvis Presley truly was than all the stories written about him in recent years." Given the amount of people who loved Elvis over the years, there has to be more stories like this. There has to be. I mean, you think of all the people who have loved this man in all of these years still today, but unfortunately, it is so hard to find them. It all comes down to which stories are getting attention. Sure, some of you may know these stories, but most don't. And let's keep in mind people who aren't even fans. If you're a diehard Elvis fan and you've been researching his life for years or reading about him all the time like me, it's possible that you know stories like this. But for some that have just listened to one of his songs on the radio or had seen a picture of him on a random Instagram, profile, and they want to know a little bit more about him and find out a little bit more about his life, chances are they're going to fall upon stories about his drug use or his relationships or his weight rather than stories like these. They would have a better chance of finding stories about all of that other stuff than what's truly at the heart of Elvis Presley. Even though these stories depict who Elvis was, the person that he was at his core, and the person that he deserves to be known and remembered as. Being in the online Elvis community for almost 3 years, I see what stories are being told and I see what stories are not being shared. I observe and I see which stories are getting the attention and which stories, even if they're posted, are not getting the attention. And I believe that Elvis deserves better. There was more to him than the sex, drugs, and rock and roll label that gets slapped across his life all of the time. The true root of who he was does not get the spotlight that it deserves. This episode doesn't even begin to detail the extent of Elvis's generosity. To quote an article on his charitable donations, the single largest donation of funds for the Arizona Memorial in Pearl Harbor came from Elvis. He would often visit sick children in their hospital rooms and then secretly send them toys or pay the entire cost of medical bills. He continuously gave generously to many charities and anonymously to the Boy Scouts in and around Memphis, and was a great supporter to the local Memphis police. Elvis gave to many charities including St. Jude, March of Dimes, St. Joseph's Indian School, the Heart Association, just to name a few. His most heart-rendering philanthropic deeds fell upon complete strangers he'd met on the street, unsuspecting strangers and friends who continuously received monetary gifts from Elvis, medical and financial support, gifts of food, clothing, and jewelry, and most of all, his love. Today, the estate of Elvis Presley continues to give to charities for the benefit of all those in need. If you know any more of these rare but important Elvis stories, please share them. Leave them in the comments below, message them, post about them on your own. Let's not leave out or gloss over any part of Elvis's history. We're saying all of his history matters, so let's show that. Let's show that all of him matters, not just the juicy little details that people want to know that have been so strewed and over sensationalized over the years and are so far from telling the story of the true Elvis Presley and who he should be remembered as. That's all I have for today. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and a thumbs down if you didn't. And if you're watching on Instagram, make sure to follow me for more Let's Talk Elvis videos where we can talk about not only the amazing entertainer that he was, but the even more amazing human being that he was. I also do want to add, I am working on a really exciting new series for Let's Talk Elvis, and that will be coming up soon in these next couple of weeks. So definitely keep your eyes peeled for a trailer. I am so excited to release this content for you guys. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.